Yes, folks, the lockdown begins in about bloody time. This should have happened about 3 weeks ago when we had our first coronavirus case, when we all knew what was happening in Italy. But at least Jacinda has finally woken up and locked the whole country down. And finally, she's doing something to plug the holes in the border, which I mentioned a few days ago. And I will cover that a bit later in the video. But first, I want to talk about Jacinda's cynical ploy to use this crisis for her own political gain. We've seen how she's thrown millions at welfare recipients and Maori for no other reason than to buy votes. But there's something else going on here that worries me even more, and that is this. She has suddenly become this so-called tough conservative leader overnight. And if she pulls this off, she could easily win the next election, because the brain dead will forget who she is. They will forget she's a satanic killer of the unborn and a destroyer of free speech and Christianity, and she's taken guns away, and the list goes on and on and on. But anyway, today I want to start this off with the lying and cheating WHO and China.
Well, in addition to downplaying the early spread of coronavirus, the press and even health organizations have also actively covered up the role of the Chinese government in fomenting this plague. It's hard to believe that's true. We're including the World Health Organization in that, but it is true. Marion Smith is executive director of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and she joins us tonight.
She?
Marion, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
The World Health Organization is, you got to think, kind of the backstop against pandemics. And I think most people instinctively trust WHO. I always have. But you're saying that it's more complicated than that. Tell us why China is influencing WHO.
Well, Director General Tedros was China's guy. He is appointed in that position a few years ago because China heavily campaigned for him to be in that post. And prior to that, in his home country of Ethiopia, he was a proponent of Chinese investment into Africa. And because of him and others at the WHO and other UN bodies, which are infiltrated by Chinese Communist Party interests, you have a situation in which China was fighting the virus, the coronavirus in Wuhan in December, and suppressed the early responders, the doctors who tried to raise the alarm. Throughout January, they were spreading misinformation and lies about the extent of the virus, denying that there was human-to-human transmission taking place. The World Health Organization defended those lies, did not investigate the data. And as late as February 24th, you had Director General Tedros and the WHO claiming that there was no uncontained spread of the virus. A week or two later, of course, they declared it a pandemic. Even now, they are not investigating claims inside of China that there are no more new cases in Wuhan, when we are hearing a growing body of evidence that there are infected individuals who are being forcibly quarantined in hotels, that they are no longer testing individuals who are reportedly dying of the disease. They are taking them straight to the incinerator.
That rings true to me.
We are hearing that this is true in the thousands. You have millions of cell phone accounts and landline accounts that have been canceled in China, especially in Wuhan, in the last 3 months. The fact that we would know more about the nuclear proliferation program in Russia today than we do about the medical situation in Wuhan is a tragedy, and it's dangerous, and it's because the WHO is more an interest, a voice, an advocate for the Chinese Communist Party than they are for the health of the world.
And that's one of the most stunning things I've heard in a long time, as the bodies are being thrown into incinerators. Marion, thank you for that.
Anyway, now to something a bit more positive.
Even on the most optimistic time frames, a coronavirus vaccine, we are told, could be a year away. So to get through the crisis, we'll need to expand hospital capacity and find ways to treat the illness. What kind of progress are we making on that? Dr. Stephen Hahn is commissioner of the FDA. We're happy to have him on tonight. Commissioner, thanks so much for coming on.
Mr. Carlson, thank you very much for having me on your show.
We're happy you're here. So with the vaccine, I think everything we read suggests it's not imminent. It isn't usually something that can be developed that quickly. Do you think there will be meaningful treatments developed in the meantime?
That's certainly correct about a vaccine. One thing I'd like to point out, Mr. Carlson, is that this vaccine was developed in record time and started in clinical trials last week. So you're right, it will take some time, but we have a good start on that. With respect to other treatments, CDC issued some guidance this weekend about the state of knowledge around treatment for COVID-19. And so we have some information from other countries, as well as beginning reports here in this country about what might be available. What's really important from an FDA perspective, sir, is that we need to use science and data to judge the safety and efficacy of any treatment. Right now, we do not have a full set of science and data to make recommendations definitively about what's safe and effective for the American people, but we are certainly committed to doing that.
For sure. And, I mean, you're the FDA. By definition, you play it as safe as it can be played, and that's your job. Tell me about the anti-malaria medication, chloroquine. The president mentioned this at a press conference. We're reading reports in the newspaper that some people with the virus are being treated with it, apparently successfully. I don't know if that's true or not. What do you know about it, to the extent you can tell us?
Yes. Both drugs, hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, are drugs that have been used for malaria. Hydroxychloroquine is approved by the FDA for treating some arthritis conditions in the United States. So it has a couple of purposes. So we do have data from other countries that we're looking at, and specifically one trial from France, which suggests that there might be some benefit for hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine against the COVID-19 disease. We also have data from test tube experiments that it does have activity against the virus. Now, that being said, we need more safety and more efficacy data, and particularly on the efficacy, the effectiveness side of this drug, to make a final determination about its effectiveness. In the meantime, this drug is available, and the CDC guidance that was provided gives doctors the information they need to determine whether they could prescribe this drug. So if I put my doctor hat on, Mr. Carlson, what I'd say is if I'm sitting across the table from a patient, and a patient is asking me about this drug, I want to know the facts, the state of knowledge around hydroxychloroquine.
Of course.
What are the risks? What are the benefits? And then as a doctor, for each individual patient, I need to make that determination. That's what the CDC guidance provides, and that the drug is available around the country for that purpose.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's around New Zealand for that purpose as well. Now, I've heard many good reports on this drug.
Interesting. It is available. Dr. Hahn,
Yes.
thanks so much for clarifying that, for coming on tonight. Good to see you.
You bet. Thank you.
So as we were just discussing, chloroquine is the name of the drug. You've heard a lot about it. There's a debate over how effective it is, if at all. The FDA commissioner just said there is evidence it can be effective. Under what circumstances, we're not sure. A man in Florida, though, credits the drug with saving his life.
I was at the point where I was barely able to speak, and breathing was very challenging. I really thought my end was there. So I made some calls to let say in my own way goodbye to my friends and family. To me, there was no doubt in my mind that I wouldn't make it till morning. So to me, the drug saved my life.
Wow. It seems quite positive to me. Anyway, meanwhile, back in New Zealand, Jacinda is only just getting around to plugging the holes at the border. Now, folks, this news clip is from a couple of days ago.
It's midday. As the government tightens its grip on the lockdown of New Zealanders, some are worried it's loosening its strings in other areas. More concerns are emerging over the country's border controls and whether we're doing enough to protect residents here. Maddie Lloyd reports.
It's something our country has never seen before.
We will close our border to any non-residents and citizens attempting to travel here.
An unprecedented move by the Prime Minister, but some say it doesn't go far enough.
We are still relatively lax in our border control.
And I agree that we have to really look at our borders now because there's a lot of people coming back to New Zealand who will be infected.
There's fears if we don't step up quarantine measures to control the spread of the virus, it'll soon control us.
It'll make a lot of difference. We know that they were bringing in 10, 15, maybe 20 cases a day. Yes, the number of visitors or returnees will decline, but it's those 20 people in that interface between arriving home and when they finally quarantine is a risk period.
Yes, this is what I said a few days back when they were allowing people to go home on public transportation. Now, how stupid was that? And now she's finally going to quarantine some of them at hotels and other places around the airport. About bloody time.
Our borders have been closed to non-residents and citizens for 5 days, but at this stage still remain open for New Zealanders travelling home. Customs says all travellers are risk assessed and screened on arrival, and all must self-isolate for 14 days. But some Kiwis are questioning whether controls are strict enough.
They could make it a lot harsher, I feel like, because here it's sort of just a verbal agreement. So basically, are you going to self-isolate for 14 days and you just say yes?
It's a really serious situation and it requires, I think, really, really strong measures and really, a lot of action to sort it out. And I just feel like currently in New Zealand, that's not the attitude that's been taken.
Although it seems the government may now be listening.
I'm looking at how we can put even more rigour around those returnees because that is an ongoing area of vulnerability.
But Jacinda, why has it taken you a week to figure this out? Haven't you been watching Italy? In that delay, you've probably killed over 100 people if New Zealand becomes Italy. And sending police around to people's houses the next day to check they have self-isolated is not going to cut it, Jacinda, because these monkeys will stop at supermarkets on their way home. One of these monkeys actually drove 200 k's and stopped at my wife's supermarket on the way home. Now, for advice on the family, Jacinda Ardern Media take us to their idea of a non-PC person for advice.
Psychologist, broadcaster and author Nigel Latter joins me now. Nigel.
Look at the smug smile on that prick's face. I detest this guy.
Well, thank you for making the time. With tomorrow night, we're going into full lockdown. This is unprecedented. Can you talk us through the psychology, how people are going to be feeling and how they need to respond?
Yeah, so I think at the moment everybody's wound up pretty tight, right? Because this is an extraordinary event and we're navigating through it with our Stone Age brains. So
your Stone Age brain.
The Stone Age brains, the little fear centres at the moment are ticking away and they're telling us that we're all going to get eaten by tigers and people are feeling really stressed and anxious and some people are tearful. So what it's about for the next little bit is just doing those really simple, basic things. Like if you're watching this in your pajamas, that's not a good thing. So you need to do the normal things. You need to get up in the morning. You need to have a shower. If it's the week, you need to put on your weekday clothes.
So I should put on a suit and stay at home if I wear a suit to work. What a complete dick.
We need to get outside and exercise, have some routine and structure in our day. Parents are going to be facing a tough time over the next 4 weeks because we love our children, but 4 weeks in a house with them is going to be tough. And there are some simple things that you can do. So if there are two of you in the house together, two parents, mum and a dad, two mums, two dads, whatever.
Oh, two mums, two dads, whatever. This is a very, very serious crisis, and he finds time to be PC.
It's about having a plan in place about how you're going to parent. With little kids, if there's two of you, you can kind of have you can spell each other out so you can get some quiet time. With older kids, involve them in the plan. It's fine to say, okay, so we're in this level 4 thing, we're inside for the next 4 weeks. How are we going to manage this if everyone's going to get frustrated and cross with each other? So maybe we have a little signal, which is, I need 20 minutes time out in a room, just some peace and quiet, those sorts of things. And with teenagers, they are suffering enough. They are at home with their families, without their friends for 4 weeks. And so with them, it's about, just forget the device time stuff. Like, that's how they stay in contact with their friends. If they're in their room and they don't want to come out, I get that. I've got a 17-year-old. He's been self-isolating since about 2018. He's been in there for a while. So
what a joke. What a time to joke. What a complete dick this guy is. Now, folks, does this coronavirus and Jacinda Ardern remind you of anything? Well, for me it does. It reminds me of Jacinda Ardern and the Christchurch terror attack and how she milked that. And she is doing exactly the same now with the coronavirus. And she's going to milk it all the way to the election.